Here's how I made a leather cuff inspired by Thorin Oakenshield. I cut a strip from veg tan cowhide, dampened the leather, laid my pattern on top, and traced over it with a pencil to transfer. Then I used a swivel knife to carve the border along the edges and all of the geometric lines in the middle. Next, I used this basic bevel stamp to bevel the inside of all of the border lines. I used a beveler along the edge and this background tool to flatten the whole background. I used a small bevel stamp just to tidy up the corners a little bit, and here's how it looked when I was done tooling. Then I used a number 2 edge beveler to round the edges on either side of the strap. I applied blue EcoFlow dye with a paintbrush along the edges and the top. Once the dye dried, I used a couple coats of leather finish to seal it in. In between every coat of finish, I used a slicker to smooth the edges. I used the pattern to punch the first hole, pressed the snap top through the hole, wrapped the cuff around my wrist, and pressed down hard to mark the second hole. I punched out that hole and set my snaps, making sure to orient them correctly so they create a circle. Then I decided it really needed more color, so I added some black dye as well. And here's the finished cuff. I make lots of nerdy things on my channel, so follow for more.